In this lesson, I'll tell you about my journey I took to become a designer, the things that inspire me, and how I became the founder of Bridge Studio. I started off my design career in Manchester when I was studying at the University of Salford. I chose to study in Salford because it had a really good reputation as a design university. Well, kind of. That's a bit of a lie, to be honest, but it does have an amazing reputation. It's a fantastic place to study. But the real reason I chose to study in Manchester was because of the music heritage and all the great bands that come from Manchester. I love bands like New Order, the Buzzcocks and Happy Mondays, and these all use colour in a fantastic way in their album artwork. The artwork for these bands was a really big influence in the early part of my career. Now let's talk about Peter Saville, the designer of New Order's artwork. Peter Saville uses colour in a really interesting and clever way in the New Order artwork. If you look at the single Blue Monday, you can see the song name is actually written in a colour code. So if you look on the album Power, Corruption and Lies, you'll see the colour code key to understand the code on the single. Then I moved to London and I was lucky enough to be headhunted by a branding agency there. And that's why I really learned how to use colour to communicate in an emotional way for brands. Here I learned the cold reality of working for an agency with tight deadlines and really demanding clients. And then I moved on to work for a magazine that helps homeless people called The Big Issue. I got to work with some really famous photographers and illustrators, and this gave me some fantastic insights into how they use colour. I then went on to work for Virgin, where I got to learn how to design everything in red. But this was a fantastic opportunity that taught me the constraints of working within a big global brand. After 8 years of working in London and feeling a little bit burnt out by the corporate world, I moved to Buenos Aires and I started working for a tech startup. There I gained some really valuable insights into how companies see design, and I was actually quite shocked to find out that sometimes a quick, dirty design actually converts better and is more successful than a really well thought out, beautiful piece of design. After 4 years of eating lots of steak and ice cream in Buenos Aires, I traveled to New York on a bus throughout the entire of Latin America, and this took 6 months. Along the way, I traveled through a city called Valparaiso, and it has some of the best street art in the world. It's fantastic. And they use so many different colors combined together, and it has a lot of energy. And then moving further up through Latin America, I came to the Atacama Desert, and I just remember how vivid that blue was. Coming from England, seeing the vivid blue sky there was quite something. And then when I got to Lima, I really saw how grey the sky could be there, and I just saw how many contrasts there were in Latin America. Along the way, I did a photography project called What Made You Happy. And in every place I stayed, I got to know some of the local people and I asked them what made them happy that week, and then I took their photograph. You can see all the interviews and photographs on the website whatmadeyouhappy.com. One thing that this project taught me was some of the most important things in life is making genuine connections with people. And this was one of the founding philosophies when I started my design agency, Bridge Studio, here in Madrid. Now you know a bit more about me. In the next lesson, we'll talk about some of my influences and how they use colour. Some artists use colour in an exceptional way. In this lesson, I'll show you some of my favourites, but let's start with Henri Matisse. Matisse uses colour in a really interesting way, especially for his time. So when he was painting these portraits, he obviously didn't paint the colours that were really there. He used colour to express the feelings of how he felt about these particular people. So obviously this person didn't have a green stripe down their face, but that just represented some emotion that Matisse wanted to convey about that particular person. He uses colour in a really, really bold and simple way. And you can also see how there's always lots of movement in his work here. Produces a very striking effect, and it reminds us a little bit of pop art too, even though he came well before the pop art movement. Some of the strongest uses of color is when Matisse started working with paper cutouts here, and this reduces the work down to pure graphic form and color. And this was really ahead of its time, so you can see how this could almost be vector artwork here. Another example of how an artist uses color in a powerful way is Josef Albers. Josef Albers started studying at the Bauhaus in Germany, and then later on in his life he moved to the United States where he taught and actually practiced art. He's best known for his exploration of color and contrast, and you can see how he achieves this with these squared patterns here. Particularly, we can see the relationship where we have the same color on different backgrounds and how this color appears different. He explores some of the ideas around visual illusions when colors are placed on different backgrounds. Here you can see how this X on the top here appears, it's a different color to the X on the bottom, but when you look here, it's actually the same color. And this has to do with the contrast in the backgrounds they have. And now I'd like to talk about Paul Rand. I love how he uses negative space and abstract forms. He's famous for using flat, bold colors in geometric forms. This is probably why so much of his work still looks really modern today. Rand took a lot of influences from Matisse, but he turned art into graphic design, giving it a commercial use. Designers Republic are another one of my big influences, especially growing up in the 90s. They used really bold, highly saturated colors. And at the time, there wasn't too many agencies that were kind of mixing print work, motion graphics, and web. So this piece was created for Sony PlayStation, and you can see how they use the very vivid colors, lots of details, and some nice metallic colors in there as well. And finally, I like to present the work of Milton Glaser. He's a great example of when to use lots of crazy psychedelic colors and then when just to use one. This makes his work really powerful. You can see it in his very famous I Heart New York. Now you can see this just uses one color. Well, two if you count black as well. And I really feel this is part of what makes it a strong piece. If he used lots of different colors, this iconic logo just wouldn't be the same. It's really powerful because it is really just red and black. You can find more information on my influences at the end of this unit in additional resources. In the next lesson, I will show you what this course is all about and how to use color theory to improve your web design. Color is really important in many different ways, and I'm going to show you in this lesson how color theory can really improve your web design. In this course, you learn how to communicate with color on a subconscious level. You'll also learn how to increase conversions on your website by understanding which colors appeal to your audience. Just in case you don't know what conversion means, it really is just when somebody signs up on your website or buys something from your website. You'll also be able to communicate the value of your color palette with the correct terminology to your boss or a client. You'll also be better at assessing your own work and troubleshooting any bad color combinations. And finally, your designs will also become more legible and accessible to people with low vision problems. For our final project, we will create a really interesting color palette that you're going to apply to our website. For that, I'll show you the fundamentals of color theory, such as what is color, how humans perceive color, the meaning of color and the psychology of it, how to combine color, how to create an original color palette for your own use, how to apply it to a website and an illustration, the importance of accessibility when choosing the color palette for your web design, and how to use art and photography as an influence. So you'll need to be familiar with packages such as Photoshop, Illustrator, and a web design package such as Sketch, Figma, or XD. But don't worry, it's not going to be a technical class. Instead, I'm going to give you some of the conceptual tools you'll need to create an engaging color palette for your web design. So now you know what your final project will be, it's time to start working on it. In the next lesson, we'll start by understanding what color is and the science behind it. In this lesson, we'll learn what color is and how humans see it. So the first thing is, what is color? Well, color is just light. We can think of this in two ways. So the first way to think about it is what is physically there. And the second way to think about what is color is how humans perceive the color. In the physical world, color really is just light. But what is light? Light is electromagnetic waves. The long waves, they're red, and then the waves get short as it goes towards blue. Okay, that's all really nice, I hear you say, but how do humans see color? So let me explain a little bit about the cells in your eyes that enable you to see color. Now, there's two types. There's rods and cones. Now, there's rods. These are longer cells, and these let you see in low-level light, but you can't kind of see color with these. And then there's the cones, and these come in three types. So the three types can see red, green, and blue, and together they'll enable you to see all the spectrums of color. Humans don't have any yellow cones, but when yellow light enters our eye, that stimulates the red and green cones, and they together will send messages to the brain, and the brain will interpret that as yellow light. That's the way humans see color, but what about other animals? So dogs have two types of cones in their eyes, and some birds will have four. Okay, the science is really cool and stuff, but why is a banana yellow? Bananas are yellow because they reflect the yellow light and they absorb all the rest of the light waves. White objects reflect most of the light that hits the surface, whereas black objects will absorb most of the light that hits them. So that's why a white car will be a lot cooler than a black car on a sunny day. The science of color is really interesting, but you're going to need to know more about the terminology to create a color palette. In the next lesson, we'll go through those tricky terms. In this lesson, I'll present color terminology and its meaning. This will give you a better understanding of how color works. Let's start with color communication. So when you say blue, what exactly do you mean? Do you mean this blue or that blue? This will help you improve your thinking in exactly what kind of color you want to use and see the subtle differences in other people's work. So let's start with what are the primary colors. Primary colors are the colors that can't be created by mixing other colors. When we're dealing with light, it's called additive, and then when we're dealing with paint or ink, it's called subtractive. When we're talking about mixing light, these primary colors are red, green, and blue. When these colors mix, they produce secondary colors. In paint, things are a little bit more complicated. Classically, we're taught that red, yellow, and blue are the primary colors. A lot of people think this is wrong, and your primary school teachers lied to you. Some people think that cyan, yellow, and magenta are actually the primary colors. Printers actually do use CMYK. Now this K actually stands for key, and that's the black. So let me show you exactly how this works with paint. So these are the colors that we're taught in school that are the primary colors here. So you can see blue mixing with red, and that produces the purple here. But the purple seems quite kind of messy and dark, and it's not a very vivid purple. Then we can see how red and yellow combine to produce orange. This is a secondary color. And also how yellow and blue combine to produce green, which is also a secondary color. So let's start off by mixing these colors, and I'll show you how they don't really produce a very vivid secondary color here. So let's start off with the yellow. And now the blue. Now we probably need a little bit less blue because it's a darker color than the yellow and we don't want it to dominate too much. So let's try and mix these together now in the middle here. And you can see how that's producing the green, the secondary color there. And be careful with the amounts of color. So if you put too much blue in, you'll get a very kind of turquoise color here. And again, if you put too much yellow in, you're going to end up with a really kind of faint green. So you can see how we've got a nice green, but it's not quite as vivid, saturated as the yellow or the blue. So when you mix two colors together, the saturation kind of lowers. So the more colors you mix together, the more dirtier the result of the color will be. Okay, so let's produce our next secondary color, which is purple. And obviously we're going to combine our blue and our red together. So let's put a bit of blue down. Again, be careful with the amount of blue and the amount of red. And now the blue here will be the most dominant color, and the red is going to be a little bit weaker here. So let's choose the red. Let's put a little bit more red down. Okay, now we're going to mix these together. So let's start off with the red. And now we're going to add a bit of blue until we're comfortable with the kind of purple we get together. Okay, so we're still quite red. And you can see how this is a really dirty purple, this. And it's not looking very vivid at all. Okay, so I'm going to keep on adding the blue here. A bit more. Yeah, now we're starting to get kind of a lot more purple. Add a bit more, still a little bit pink. Okay, and you can see underneath here, we've got a lot richer purple here. So if you did want a lighter purple, you'd kind of mix this with a bit more water here. But this is our pinky purple. I think that's probably about right there. You can see underneath on the white paper, we have a lot more of a more vivid purple there. Our next secondary color is orange, and obviously this is made combining yellow and red, and let's see what that looks like. So let's put down yellow. And the red, and this time the red's going to be the dominant color here, so we've got to be careful we don't put too much in there. There we go, not too much red. And as yellow is the least dominant color here, we're going to start off with that. Let's put that in the center, and now let's introduce bits of red until we get an orange. So let's put a little bit more red in. Be careful not to go over the top. So you can see here we've got the secondary color orange, and it's not quite as vivid or saturated as the yellow or the red here. So you're probably thinking about tertiary colors now, and tertiary colors, they're made by mixing the secondary color with the primary color. So for example here, let's take this orange and then mix that with the red. You'll be careful not to kind of overdo it. And then we have our tertiary color, which is a red-orange. Let me just clean the brush. And now our next tertiary color, we'll mix the yellow with the orange to produce a kind of yellowy orange. Just pick some of that up there before it dries. So we've got a lot more kind of lighter orange there. So this kind of works, but I'm going to show you why printers use CMY now to produce some more vivid colors. Okay, so you're thinking cyan and blue, that's the same color, right? Well, not exactly. And I'm going to show you the difference it makes when we're mixing them. Okay, on my left here, we have the cyan, which we traditionally use in the printing. And here we have the color blue. And you can see here, when we mix the cyan with the magenta, this actually produces a more vivid purple here, rather than the kind of dirty purple we had before. Okay, so the same thing with the red and the magenta. So the magenta, that's kind of a more pinky red, and the red, well, that's kind of red. So you can see here, when we mix the magenta with the yellow, that produces a stronger tone of orange. So let's create some secondary colors using this CMY color wheel. Let's take the magenta here. And next, the cyan. And let's see how these are going to combine to produce the purple. And they should produce a purple that's a lot more vivid this time. Now let's start off little by little, combining these colors here. Okay, right, we can see already this is a lot more vivid than what we had before. Before we had a really dirty kind of purple, really dark, and it didn't really look much like purple. But here, this is a lot more vivid. And I didn't have to combine too much paint either. Let's put a little bit more blue in. And then we have our really strong purple. Next up, we're going to mix cyan with yellow to produce green, which is our next secondary color. Right, let's put some cyan down. And obviously this is going to be the most dominant color, so we don't want to put too much down. Next, the yellow. So let's start off by mixing the yellow in first. And I'm guessing that we only want a little bit of blue. Oh, that was a tiny bit, and you can already see how much effect it has on the yellow there. Okay, so we have a really vivid green coming on here. So we're going to add a little bit more cyan to get the green we want. There we go. That is looking fantastic. And there we have our secondary color, which is our green. Next up, we're going to produce orange by combining magenta and yellow. Now, magenta is going to be the dominant color here, so we don't want to put too much of it down. So as yellow is the least dominant color, let's start off with that, and we're going to add magenta as we go. Tiny bit of magenta, and you can already see that has quite a strong effect on the yellow. Let's add just a little bit more. Okay, now we've got a very vivid looking orange in comparison to before. There we go. I think I'm happy with that. And there we have our secondary color, which is the orange. You can see the differences a lot more clearly if we put both examples side by side. You can see how this purple here is a lot more dirty, a lot more darker than this purple here, and how vivid this is. And the same goes for the green. This is a really bright, strong green, whereas this is kind of a lot less saturated. So this is the main reason why printers use the CMYK colors rather than the blue, red, yellow colors. This doesn't affect us that much apart from when we use the color wheel, because the RGB color wheel is different from the CMY color wheel. We'll be using them to produce color harmonies, but we'll come back to that drama later. For now, let's just concentrate on the differences between CMYK and RGB. We know that CMYK is used for print and RGB is used for screen design. But what else? RGB colors can be a lot more vivid than CMYK colors. RGB colors may look amazing and really vivid, but be careful when you use them for your brand colors. So be careful when you're choosing a color for your brand that it can be reproduced both in print and digital. You can achieve bright neon colors in print, but you will have to use a special spot color to achieve this. Let's go deep into color terminology, and we'll start with hue. This just means color basically, so it's red, green, blue, or any other color that's out there. Saturation. This is how intense and vivid a color is. A highly saturated color has a lot more energy than, let's say, a lowly saturated color. Value. This is how light or dark a color is. You can see how Sketch, Photoshop, and many other programs handle this. Now let's talk about tints and shades. So a shade is just when you add black to a color and you make it darker. And a tint is when you mix white with a color to make it lighter. Temperature. So we can divide the color wheel into hot and cold colors. So the colder colors will be all the colors like blues, purples, and some shades of green. And the hotter colors obviously will be the reds, oranges, and yellows. Contrast. So we can have three types of contrast. So contrast in hue is when we have the colors on the opposite side of the color wheel. We can also have contrast in saturation with highly and lowly saturated colors. And we can also have contrast in the value with light and dark colors. So when somebody asks you to describe a color, you can use all this to give them a better description of that exact color. So for example, instead of saying, I want to use a blue, you can say, I want to use a highly saturated dark blue that has a touch of warmth to it. So that will be more towards the kind of purple side. And then what you can do, you can back that up with a real life example. So you could say, right, I want to use this type of blue, highly saturated dark, that reminds me of the night sky just when the sun has gone down. When assessing other designers' work, you can now use more specific language. So for example, you can say, I feel there's too much contrast between the blue and the red. It will work better if we lower the saturation of one of those. So as you can see, there's a lot of theory behind color, but there's also a lot of subjectivity behind it. In the next lesson, we'll look at how cultures around the world will interpret colors differently. See you there. In this lesson, we'll look at how cultures around the world interpret colors differently. And one way to understand this is through language. Colors appear in a wavelength. Here we have red, the longest wave, and they go all the way through to the blue, and they have the shorter waves here. Now, it's only the humans that have marked the kind of specific places. So here, this is what we call red. Then we've put another cut here, that's orange, yellow, green, cyan, and blue. So when you learn another language, you think it's just a case of learning the corresponding words to green, blue, and red and just change that out for the different language, right? Wrong. So some cultures have more colors in their vocabulary than others. The ancient Greeks actually have no word for blue. Similarly to the Himba tribe in Africa, they also don't have any word for blue. Interestingly, the difference in language also affects how we see color. A scientist from Goldsmiths University in London showed the Himba tribe a circle made up of green squares and one blue square. And then he asked them to pick out the color that was different. And they actually found it quite difficult to pick out the blue square that was different from all the green squares. However, they do have more words for green, and they could easily pick out the different shades of green, whereas English speakers struggled a bit on that one. So what does this mean for web design? So if you're designing an app, let's say a mobile money wallet in remote parts of Africa where bank accounts aren't that common, but mobile usage is, it'd be a good idea to know a little bit about the culture of the people there. When designing call to action buttons, it's a really good idea to have a contrasting color with the rest of the elements on the page. So having a green call to action on a page with lots of blue might not be the best idea in this case. Obviously, this is a simplification, and humans, they're a lot more complicated than that. But please keep this in mind when you're designing for other cultures, and do your research and actually go and speak to these people and get first-hand opinions from them. As cultures develop their vocabulary for color, researchers have found out usually they develop the colors in the same order. Usually, the different cultures will learn the different names of colors in the same way. So first up, we have dark and light, or black and white. Then they develop words for red. After that, green or yellow. Then blue. And then last of all, they develop words for grey, purple, orange, and brown. Most cultures place the markers for the different colors along the spectrum in kind of the same place. And we see that they also develop the names of the colors in the same order. So when a culture is developing their vocabulary for color, they'll start off by inventing words for light and dark, black and white, and they will develop a color for red, yellow or green, blue, and then gray, purple, orange, and brown. I left more information about this in the additional resources. Despite our many differences, this suggests that we have a common understanding of how we interpret color and the world around us. Colors take on different meanings around the world in different cultures. In China, red symbolizes wealth and good fortune. So red envelopes with money are given as gifts on New Year's Eve there. If we look at the HSBC logo, we can possibly interpret this as a red envelope. So if you're looking for inspiration for a bank with its roots in Chinese culture, red would be a really good color to choose. Another difference between Eastern and Western culture is the interpretation of white. In China and India, white is used to symbolize purity. Cultures aren't confined to just being in different countries. You can also have subcultures within countries, such as fashion tribes. Bright neon colors may seem overbearing to some, but if you are part of the early 90s rave scene, they might have expressed the kind of energy and the youthfulness of that time. Color in culture can also change its meaning over time. In the British Isles, green was used for wedding dresses to symbolize fertility. When Christianity arrived, that then changed to white. A little closer to our times, we can look at the color orange and how that is being used to symbolize budget services such as EasyJet. As you can see, it's important to understand how cultures interpret colors differently. It's not the only consideration, and in the next lesson, we'll dive deep into the color psychology. In this lesson, we'll learn about some of the misconceptions around color psychology, and I'll give you a framework so you can discover the true meaning behind any color. Some color preferences are buried deep within our subconscious. We don't know why it doesn't look right, but we can feel that this color combination is wrong. Food is something that is really powerfully affected by our preconceptions of color. So would you buy a green or gray kind of ice cream? Over generations, humans have evolved to become really wary of color that has this green or gray kind of appearance, because that means it might be rancid. Some fruits will even signal to us when they're ripe and ready to eat. They'll turn from green, which is abundant in trees and foliage, to a bright red. And it's no coincidence that red is on the opposite side to the color wheel than green. So for most people around the world, their favorite colors are actually very similar, and this is linked to evolution. A study found that most Americans have the same favorite colors, and they were blue and green. And this is probably because of where humans evolved in lush grasslands. So we have the green and then the blue of the sky. Most people stated blue as their favorite color. And for men, green came in second and purple came in second for women. And then green was third favorite for women. In general, men prefer brighter saturated colors and women prefer softer tones of the colors. But as you've probably guessed, it's a lot more complicated than that. So choosing a color for your website is a bit more complicated than choosing blue for men and purple for women. When designing a color palette for a website, you have to take into account your target audience, their kind of likes and tastes, and also the other brands in the market. So for example, if you were to design a website for women's razor blades, you would have the choice between following the trend and the rest of the market, or standing out and doing something a little bit different. So if you do follow generalizations in colors for designing websites, it can make your website appeal a little bit too obvious or boring, but it is something that you do have to keep in mind. These two websites both use softer tones and can be perceived as being feminine, but I'm guessing that there's tons of girls out there who really don't like these colors. This example for me is a much better approach. The colors are a lot more subtle and they contrast really well with the metallic details. Actually, I really like these colors and I wouldn't actually mind this for myself, but then again, I don't really shave that much. Now let's move on to the misunderstanding or misconceptions around color meaning and color psychology. A lot of online color guides are completely wrong. Well, not completely, but they're not completely right either. Colors do have a psychological effect on us, but the actual effect is a lot more complicated than the predefined kind of messages you'll read online. I'll show you a great way of determining a color's meaning with this framework I've developed. First of all, let's take into consideration the color's description. So things like value, saturation, and hue. So in the next column, we have the perceived kind of physical and psychological effects on us. And you're going to have to do your own research here to kind of really find out what these perceived effects are, but we'll run through a couple of them now. So some of the effects that red might have on us is that it increases our heart rate, blood pressure, and metabolism. Green. So darker shades of green make us feel very calm and settled. And this is probably because humans have evolved in green settings. So if you imagine a lush green forest, makes us feel at home. Blue. This can make us feel calm and serene, and is also linked with confidence and feeling secure. Blue can also create feelings of sadness and depression. One really interesting example is Buchanan Street in Glasgow. And what they did here, they changed the normal street lighting to blue street lighting, and then that actually reduced the level of crime. And they're not 100% sure why. Maybe it reminded them of the police, or it just made them feel a bit calmer, but it did reduce the overall level of crime. And finally, yellow. Now this color can be seen as being really positive, and it can increase our metabolism, but it can also create feelings of frustration. And researchers have found out that babies are a lot more likely to cry when they're placed in a yellow room. Next up is culture. So colors can change their meaning in different cultures, and cultures aren't just defined by countries either. Within countries, you can have subcultures as well, and that will change the color meanings. Some cultures will have more colors in their vocabulary, and this will also affect how those cultures see colors too. And finally, we have to take into account the context. This is super important. So the meaning of red will change whether you see it on a car, a sexy dress, an envelope, or a cancel button. A fourth layer you can add is personal interpretation. And this might not be too useful when you're designing for kind of big groups of people, but keep in mind that every person will have their own meanings that they're going to put onto color. So now you can take all this information and discover the true meanings of color for yourself. I really hope this framework helped you a lot in discovering the true meanings of color, and I've also included it in the resources. In the next lesson, we're going to start our final project by creating a color palette. In this lesson, we'll talk about color harmonies and how to create them. As the name cunningly suggests, it's really just how to combine color in a harmonious way. But I see it as just a guide or a place to start. We're going to use our color wheel to produce our harmonies. Let me show you how. Okay, so let's dive into some color harmonies here. Now, the first one we're going to look at is monotone. So all monotone is taking one particular hue or color here and then producing some tints. So that's adding white, or we can produce shades, which is adding black there. So it's a really, really simple color harmony here, and you can't really go wrong with this one. It's dead simple. And let's have a quick look at an example on the web for this. So this is a great example of a website that just uses one hue here. So you can see how it's just using tones of yellow, and then it skips through to just using tones of red there. Next up is analog color harmony, and this again is really simple. So we just use 3 or 4 colors adjacent to each other in the color wheel. One important tip here is to make sure you have enough contrast between your hues, because they're all very similar here. And this will produce a design that doesn't have a lot of contrast in it. It might be quite calming. So let's have a look at an example of an analog color scheme on the web. So here's a great example of using analog colors on the web. These are really vibrant. You can see how they've taken the saturation and really bumped it up there. So we've got our cyans, blues, and kind of turquoises here. And they've also added some texture there. So this is, gives it a little more interest in there and makes it really appealing to look at. And as you can see, there's enough contrast between this tone of blue here, the cyan in the background, and the lighter tone of the blue, as well as the turquoise here. So let's just have a little look down the page. Wow, I love that animation. It's so good. There's also enough contrast with the blue here and the white background, so anybody with low vision problems won't have a problem reading that. And again, you can see plenty of contrast between these and gives a really nice effect here. Next up is complementary color harmony. Now this is the harmony probably with the most contrast here. So all we do to create this color harmony is take two colors on the opposite side of the color wheel. So here we have red and green, but it also could be this warm yellow and this kind of purple blue here. Or similarly, it could be this yellowy green and a magenta there. So any color on the opposite side of the color wheel. One thing to keep in mind when you're producing complementary color harmonies is you don't have too much contrast, and be careful the colors don't kind of vibrate. So you can see here that's kind of not too pleasant to look at. But there is a very simple fix for this. So we can bring down the value or saturation of one of these colors. So let's take a look. So this is still complementary color harmony, and we still do have a red and a green, but we've taken the saturation out of this red, and it's a lot lighter as well. And this green here is a lot less saturated, but it still retains a similar kind of value, kind of lightness, darkness. And you can see we don't have this vibration, and these colors sit together a lot better than before. So before we have this kind of really vibrating in-your-face colors scheme. And okay, you might want this actually. If you want to create a disturbing, powerful look, or if you want to communicate the feeling of being uneasy, maybe you should go for this kind of color scheme. But if you don't, if you want to produce something that's kind of a less of a visual attack, I would bring down the saturation or the value on one of these colors here. So let's take a look at a website that uses a complementary color harmony scheme. This is a fantastic mini site for Spotify and Pitchfork. And you can see here how they're using these tones of green and a kind of reddy orange. One thing I like to say is use color harmony as a base and then tweak it and kind of make it fit your work. So this is loosely based on complementary color harmony. And you can see how this produces a really engaging, really vivid site. And you can see how they're using the orangey red here to highlight areas. So the most important parts go in the very saturated color, and they don't use too much of it because it'd be really overbearing. You can see these numbers here, the timeline, and just to pick out details. And also you can pair it with a neutral color like black. So you don't need to use the color harmony everywhere, but you can use it maybe just in some of the numbers and the text there. I really love this website. Fantastic. So again, we have another example of complementary color harmony. So we've got our orange yellow and our blue purple. So let's move on and see what that looks like. Again, this is quite a powerful combination, and it's a little bit hard on the eyes here. So we can do what we did before, and we can take the saturation down or the value down, make it darker or lighter. Okay, right, that's a lot more easy on the eyes there. Next up is split complementary. So again, this is very similar to the complementary color harmony. So we take one color and then we go across to the other side of the color wheel and we take the one above it and below it. So I'd have similar advice to the previous color harmony, and I would kind of take down the saturation of one or two of these and then try to lead with one color that's bright. So if you are going to combine them, I would combine them in this way, taking down the saturation of the yellow and the blue and leaving the saturation of the purple here. Or you could leave the saturation of just one of them. So it depends on you and which kind of color scheme will suit your brand. So let's take a look at a website that uses split complementary color harmony. And you can see this website for Pharrell Williams here. And let's go back to our color wheel. So we've got our purple, and they use a lot more saturated purple here. And then they use a blue. Well, okay, they've gone slightly more towards the green side, and they've got a very vivid yellow. So, as I said before, use it as a starting place and then tweak it for your needs there. So again, we can see our split complementary colors here, and they've even got another one here, orange. So again, it's being used as a base, and then you can go from there. Another thing I can see here, they've used a lot more white space because these colors are really vivid, they're really saturated. So you don't want too much of these, it's going to be a little bit tiresome. But it's a really good example of how to use these very vibrant color schemes. It's going to bring a lot of life to your work and a lot of energy. So the more contrast, the more energy you have here, and the more saturation too. Okay, now let's look at triadic color harmony. And this is simply just using 3 points to make a triangle. And this can be rotated anywhere around the color wheel. So in this example, we have yellow, blue, and red. Okay, let's see how this website uses triadic color scheme. And again, as I've explained before, when you're using a few colors together, it's good to bring the saturation down so they're not fighting too much. So you can see how they've used the pale blue background, the red boat, and these touches of yellow here. So these colors aren't vibrating too much, not fighting, and it feels quite calm, even though there's a lot of contrast between the hues here. Now let's move on to quadratic color harmony. This, as the name suggests, makes a square here on the 4 points. In this example, we have blue, green, yellow, and red. Now let's see how we can use these together. So as you guessed it, if we use them all at full saturation here, they're going to clash and the colors are going to be fighting together. So again, we do what we did before, and we're going to bring the saturation down a little bit here so they're not fighting very much. One very famous example of using quadratic color harmony is Google. This is really interesting to see how they've evolved their logo and how they've tweaked their colors and made really subtle changes. So you can see here in the 90s, their beta testing is really, really acid colors. You can see how the logo is really bitmapped. And then throughout the 90s, they're kind of still using these really vivid colors. And they also start with the green as well. So that's interesting how that changes the personality. The logo's also got shades and drop shadows on it. Again, towards the end of the 90s, still really vivid, still really acidic colors. And you can see these clash a lot. And it makes it feel a lot more maybe childish in some way. And then as we progress into more modern times, you can see how they've taken the saturation down a tiny bit here. So this blue is a lot less electric, the red is more subtle. And you can even see here the yellow, that started off as a really vivid kind of lemon yellow. And here it's a little bit more orange. Blue again we talked about, and the green. So that's a little bit more pastel, and it's a little bit of a cooler green. And they started off with this is really yellow green here. So hopefully now in the course, you're going to learn to spot these subtle differences and see how that really changes the personality of your visual design work. And here on the Google design page, you can see how to actually use these colors and use the logo here. This is really nice because you can kind of see a little bit of their process they went through, how they combine the colors here, the typography, how they use in dots and that animation. There's even a video here. So I would look into this and you can see the exact kind of colors here as well. So it's super interesting. So please go and check out the Google brand and how they use colors and the whole evolution of their look and feel. I hope these color schemes have really sparked your interest in how to create color harmonies. In the next lesson, we're going to put this into practice and see how to create some really amazing color palettes. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how I create color palettes in Sketch, but you can use anything really. You can use Photoshop, Figma, XD, or even Illustrator. So the good thing is to start off with some kind of color harmony. I'm going to start off with a quadratic color harmony here. It's not the easiest color harmony to use because we're using a lot of colors, going to be a lot of conflicts here. So let's start off making a few rectangles here of our colors or squares. And let's sample the colors we have here. So we've got this blue. Okay, I don't want any borders. I want fills in there. So let's click on fills. Let's sample that. Let's copy it. Let's make our next color. Okay, green. It's very bright green. And let's take our yellow. And then finally, we're going to have our red here. These are really bright. As I said before, let's take down the color harmony. Well, that actually looks a bit orange. So again, please use your own common sense when you're doing this. Color harmony is just a place to start. And if you feel that anything looks off, please change it. Okay, so this is a little bit more of a red. I want to take it over a tiny bit more purple there, a bit more crimson. Yeah, I think that's a bit more interesting. So these are really vibrant, really saturated colors and all fighting each other. So let's take down a little bit of the saturation here. And in Sketch, as with many other programs, you can use Figma or XD, or even if you're using Illustrator or Photoshop, it all works in a pretty similar way. So we can bring the saturation down here. We move it across. I still want to keep it quite dark, actually. I quite like having this contrast. So let's just move that across a touch. There's green here. We want this a bit lighter, a little bit less saturated. Okay, that's good. Now let's take a bit of that fierceness out of our yellowy orange. And I want a little bit of a warmer yellow there, a little bit more orange. Let's take it down a little bit. And again, this red is really quite powerful. So let's bring that down a touch. That is going a bit pink now. I'm not quite sure if I like that. Let's just take it a little bit over towards the orange. There we go. And that looks a lot better. They're working together. So let's take our color swatches here and then let's move them down. And what we're going to do, we're going to add a few tints and shades to give us a few more options, make our color palette a bit more versatile. So let's copy the blue purple over there. And let's make a darker version of that. Make sure we've got enough contrast there. Okay, maybe that's a little bit too much. Let's lighten it up just a little bit. There we go. Let's add a tint of the green in there as well. Let's lighten that up. So we just bring that diagonally up. So just do as many as you feel comfortable with here. Let's create one for the red too. All right, should we go lighter on this? Yeah, let's go lighter. Now we have a really diverse color palette. Okay, so let's copy that again. And now what we're going to do, we're going to add an overlay, and we're going to add like a warm overlay and a cold overlay. And this will just give us a few more options. We don't have to use these options, but it's there if we need it. So let's create a rectangle. Let's overlay that there. Okay, right, we don't want borders, we want a fill. Now let's choose our warm color. Let's put it to red. Boom. Okay. Now let's choose a multiply option or kind of overlay option. Again, there's a lot of like Photoshop will work similarly to this, Figma will work similar to this, but there's going to be a similar option whichever package you use. Let's try hard light. Okay, that's really strong. Now let's bring down the opacity to about here. And this will give us variations of these colors, but in kind of a slightly warmer versions of those. And what that will do, it'll also unify these colors as well and make them feel like they're part of the same family. Now let's copy that. So if you hold down Option and just drag, that will just automatically copy it. Okay, so that's our warm color. Now let's try our cold version. So let's bring this over into the blue or cyan around there. Okay, so in the middle, we've got our original colors, above are warm and below cold. So if we just copy our original colors here, hold Option or Alt, drag it down, and then if we select this color, click on the color here and use this tool here, the eyedropper, and we go over the top. Then we can select this color here. So we have the color code here to reproduce it. And let's do that again quickly with the other variations. And you can see now we have a different option of our original color palette, but it's all a lot warmer. This feels quite vintage, actually. This is quite nice. I like this. So again, if you have problems creating like an original color palette or something different, try this. This is a good way to kind of go outside your comfort zone. Right, I've got to click on this. That was the problem. So let's just make this a little bit smaller. Okay, let's hold an option, copy it again. Now let's do this with the cold colors. And this is here just to give you alternatives. You don't have to use this, but we can start having a conversation around, should these colors be warmer, colder? Which ones do we feel fit our design better? One thing I do find is when you start putting filters on top of things and layer opacities, the colors do get a little bit more dirty. But they are quite unified. So we have two variations on this color palette, and they're both looking really interesting there. I think I still prefer the original. Maybe you guys will prefer one or the other here. But it's a great place to start, and then you can go on this journey of making it colder, warmer, and experimenting there. Similarly to this, we can do with light and dark. So let's take the warm color, take all the saturation out, put it on white. So we have our light shades, and then let's take all the saturation out and put some dark shades. And again, you can just do the same thing again, so you've got the color codes for you there. Okay, so that's our lighter version, and you can see they're a lot more pastel than this. That feels really nice, a lot calmer as well. Let's copy it and do the darker shades. Just click on the eyedropper, darker shades here. So all this exercise does, well, this part of the exercise, it gives you options. So we've got warmer options here, cooler options, lighter options, and darker options here. So now we can start having conversations around, right, I think this is too hot, too cold, too dark, too light, too much saturation in there. And we've got a good amount to choose from here. And then finally, as I said before, use your own common sense. Make sure these colors are all looking good. So if there's a color here that you think, oh, that yellow feels really out of place, let's just take a bit of saturation down. Okay, does that feel better? Is this too dark? Is this too light? Do these greens, do they need to be more yellow? Do they need to be colder? Just make your fine tuning adjustments here. At the moment, I feel I'm quite comfortable with these, so I'm not going to change anything. Next up, we want to start checking the contrast here. So we want to see how these colors look next to each other. In the introduction, you would have heard me talk about Josef Albers and his artwork around color, contrast, and putting squares on each other. So this is kind of influenced by this. And you'll be surprised how colors change depending on the colors they're paired with. Let's start with this box and let's see how this yellow background works with pink on top. Okay, so maybe when we're designing our website, maybe we want to combine those, maybe there's not enough contrast. Let's take some of the colors. Let's choose this kind of pastel green, and then let's try the dark purple. Plenty of contrast there. Those two colors sit really well together. Okay, let's try a few more contrasts here. Let's try this pastel pink with a stronger red. Okay, that's quite a nice color there. So you can see how this red will change depending on if it's on a different background. Let's try this red again. Let's try and put it on a different background and see how that relationship changes. So let's try yellow. Okay. And you can do as many of these as you want. So just make sure that there's no clashing colors. You might get some that clash. Maybe this isn't the best combination here. So you're just aware of it when you come onto your design. I think that works better. Let's try a couple more. The purple, that's quite strong. That's interesting. It vibrates a little bit, so we want to be aware of that in our design. Let's try the darker tone here. Okay, that works really well. Okay, next up we have something called color balance. And this is basically saying how much of each color we're going to use. And a good rule of thumb is to use what's called the 60-30-10 rule. So we designate 60% to one color or one group of colors, let's say, 30% to another, and then 10 to another one as well. And usually the 10%, that will be the most vibrant color. So we don't want it all yellow or red because they're really intense colors. So for this to work, let's start grouping these colors together. So let me see. It's going to take a couple of seconds to think about this. So let's group cold colors together. And then let's group these two really vibrant colors together. And let's just have that on its own. Okay, so let's give this a width of 600 because this all has to add up to 1,000. So let's say 600. Click on that. Okay, that's our percentage. Let's move these other colors out of the way. Okay, this will be the 30. So let's give that a width of 300. Okay, and finally, these two colors, we can say they're the 10%, so that'll be 100. So that is our color balance here. Again, I've just done that really quickly. Please choose the color balance you feel most comfortable with. Another thing I find really useful is to add white or to use white as the 60% because when you're designing online, you don't want to bombard your users with heavy color all the time. But again, that depends on your brand. You might want strong colors there, or you might not. But let's try by using white as 60%, and then we can just copy these colors and then just push them all down. So we might want to use it like that. Again, depends on your color scheme. When we apply these colors, we'll adjust these to make sure they work on the actual website. So let's do a quick recap. We've chosen our color harmony, which was quadratic. We've taken down the saturation a little bit so they're not clashing. We've added some tints and some shades. We've made some variations by adding a kind of warm color to the top, an overlay, a cold color, and then we've actually reproduced these colors here so we have all the correct colors here. And then we've done that again, but with light and dark. Again, this just gives us more options. And then we've added some personal adjustments if we need them. Then we went on to check the contrast here and see if there's any problem areas. You can also go back and adjust your color palette. And then we started to create the color balance here using the 60-30-10 rule. And finally, we've looked at it with white there. So you might want to add a lot of white into your website to make it a bit more calmer. You can also use online color generators too. And Adobe Color is a fantastic example. Me personally, I prefer to do it myself. I think with online color generators, you can have too many options and you start kind of fiddling around with exact numbers and things like that. I never feel I can get it quite how I want it. But it really depends on yourself. You may really like using these, and they have all the options we just went through. So that analog colors, monotone, triadic, complementary. Sometimes when you're a little bit stuck and you need some more inspiration, these are fantastic tools to use. So I've shown you how to create a color palette from scratch. But let's say you're a bit low on inspiration or you just want some new influences. And we can use a photo, or it can even be a painting, it can be a famous photo. So just select an image you think has a nice group of colors on there. I took this photo when I was traveling in the north of Spain, in the Basque Country, and you can see how wonderful the summer is there. I really love the place. One of the reasons why I want to use this photo because it has a lot of cold green tones in here and some really lovely blue grays. So I'll show you how to generate a color palette using this photo. First of all, we want to copy the background and make another layer. So select all, copy, paste. Okay, we've got our new layer here. So if we make any mistakes, we can just revert back to that. Now let's select filter, then pixelate and crystallize. So this will just split or crystallize the photo up into block colors. I'm going to put it somewhere midway here. So I've still got a lot of colors to choose from, but there's not going to be kind of too many. Okay, let's try here. Wow. Okay, right. Now you can see it's reduced it to flat colors. Now let's zoom out a little bit. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to make the canvas a little bit bigger so we've got space to create our color palette. So if you click on the crop tool here, and then just make a bit of space down the bottom. And now we're going to create our color palette. So we get our ellipse tool. And then I think it's good to kind of start off around about 6 colors. So let's create a circle. Got a nice vector circle there. Don't worry about aligning this too much at the moment. You can do that later. Double click in the layers here. And then let's just select some colors. I really like these cold greens here. So that's one. Now we're going to copy this. So just press Option and move it. And then let's select some more greens and cold blues here. What we're trying to do, we're trying to get a range of colors, but we want sufficient contrast in there. And I can see there's some cold greens up here and some slightly warmer greens down here. So I want enough contrast. There's not enough contrast between those two. So let's select this green here. Okay. And then let's go through the process like this. And I want a bit of a contrast in green. So let's choose one of these light ones here. I think that's enough greens. Let's try some of these cold grays and blues. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's looking really nice. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's choose a slightly lighter gray. There we go. And one more. Let's have a look, see if we've got kind of almost a white. Is there enough contrast in there? So I would go for something like this, but you can also experiment. You can just kind of spend some time clicking around here, see if there's anything unexpected. That's actually quite interesting. So I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to push it over there. That feels a bit more harmonious. Let's try one more color. Copy that. Let's try a really pale gray. Okay, so now we have our color palette based on our photo. And you can rearrange these colors. Let's say I want some of my greens together here, or you want your blues together. So just go through the color palette and arrange it how you think kind of makes the most amount of sense. So I'm going to start off with the greens on the right. So the greens are going to go kind of dark to light. And then the grey is going to go from dark to light into the center. Yeah, so let's just click on them all. Okay, so now we're going to align them all nicely. So let's use this Align tool at the top. There we go. And then we have our color palette based on a photo. Please make sure that you have enough contrast between all the colors here and you don't get any kind of odd colors popping out. So I feel this brown here, even though I really like it, I feel it's a little bit of the odd one out. So I'm going to choose another green that kind of fits in better with our family of greens here. So another tone of green that has enough contrast, but is still in the same family. Okay, I think that looks a little bit better. So we have our greens and our greys working together there. Okay, so if we want to start fine-tuning these colors, just select a color there, double click in the layer palette, and here you can see how the color picker works in Photoshop. So we have our web color here, we have our RGB, and then the CMYK if you need to use it in print. So you can see this window here, this square. So if we go off to the left, that makes our color less saturated. And if we go off to the right, that's more saturated. And then if we go up, it gets lighter. So that's the value. And then the value gets darker as we go down there. So again, feel free just to tweak these colors, make sure you've got enough contrast and they all feel like part of the same family. And when we're happy with our color palette below, just click on the layer there and we can reveal our original photograph. So now we've created our own color palette using the principles of color harmony. We're now going to apply it to our own website. In this lesson, we're going to take the color palette you designed and apply it to our website. Okay, here we go. So now we've got our color palette here on the left, we went through in the last lesson. Now we're going to actually apply it. So this is the kind of real meat and bones of the work here. So what I like to do is once I've got my color palette here, let's just drag this across onto this artboard in Sketch. I'm going to start off with a few things to keep in mind. So use common sense here. I know when you have a process, sometimes you get a bit kind of blinded by the process and then you look at the work and it's kind of not right. So do take a step back and say, does this work? Is this right? And then make the adjustments that you need. So some other things to keep in mind when we're applying the colors are the colors legible? Is there enough contrast in there? Are there too many colors? Because when you're creating your palette, it's kind of quite fun to do all these tints and shades and kind of different warmths of the colors, but sometimes you might only need a couple of colors. And then another tip, especially for web design, do you need to add gray or black? And you'll find, well, I especially find when designing websites, I end up with lots and lots of grays. I try to minimize them and keep them just to a few because it will kind of make your developers, the programmers, go crazy when there's too many shades of gray, but they are really useful. Now let's just kind of pop down here. So I've created this kind of separate palette of grays. So I might need a nearly kind of black. Not a great idea to use solid black. So I will just normally take something that's almost black and I can use that for text. But I find if you go 100% black, it's just a bit too harsh. And then go lighter as you need it, because a lot of the time you'll need a really light background for text or another part of the web page. And when designing your grays, it's a good idea not to go for a really neutral gray, but just kind of push it towards a kind of cold gray. So mix it with a bit of blue. Or you can go for a warm grey, so mix it with a bit of red. It just makes them a lot more interesting. But for this project, I'm using cool greys here. Okay, let's get into it. So we've got our color palette here. And then one tip I do is I create these mini kind of proto kind of websites here. So it's not the actual finished website, it's got nothing to do with it, but it just uses elements that we commonly use in websites. So we've got a graphic element. This could be an icon, it could be a logo. We have a headline, body copy, primary button, secondary button, a link, an image, and a background. And we're just going to experiment here with our colors and see which ones work best. Now let's take our color balance as well. Let's bring this up here as a guide. Now there, let's bring this down. And now we're just going to experiment going through applying these colors to our kind of proto websites here. And then once we feel comfortable with how the colors applied, then we can take it across to our real website. So let's go for like an easy option first. I want a white background and headline. Let's go with something. Let's go with a classic. Let's just use this black. Text. I like a little bit of contrast. So let's have this in a slightly lighter gray. Now the buttons, we want to use one of our highlight colors here. So we've got our 6% white for the background, and let's choose this green here. This is really vivid. And you can also drag your colors down into the swatches here to make your life a lot easier, so you're not kind of traveling with your eye picker tool all the time. Okay, that works really well for the bottom. Let's try our secondary button here. So we're just going to change the border color. I hope there's enough contrast with the background and I hope the text is legible. We can check that later on with an online tool. I think that's looking quite good. I'm a little bit worried that there's not enough contrast for people with low vision, but let's check that out later. Okay, now let's use the link. So I'm going to make a rule here. Anything clickable, I'm going to turn it green, and I'm going to dedicate that color for anything clickable. So when the user's scanning down the page, they're going to see something green and go, oh, I can click on that. What else do we have here? So we have this background, this neutral gray. So I'm going to pick one of these grays up here. I want this cold gray. Okay, that's really nice. And you can see here in the text, this is just dummy text. here, by the way, it's not real. You can use lorem ipsum. I think this is like a lorem ipsum generator. It's called hipster ipsum, so it's kind of got these like fun kind of phrases in there, but it's all kind of gobbledygook. So anything clickable, like I said before, is green. Okay, is there enough contrast in that in the background? We need to see. We're going to use our black here. I don't think I have it in my color palette, so we're just going to go there. I'm going to select my black again. It's working well, but I'm missing a lot of the colors here. So let's say this was an icon. Let's pick one of our colors. Okay, we are missing the red and the blue. These colors can come in further down the web page. We don't have to cram it all in one design. Let's experiment. Okay, so maybe it's the red. Maybe this is an icon. Maybe it's the brand logo. It's like we've got one option there. Now let's try some more options. Let's see what happens if we turn this background to the blue. Okay, right. Obviously here we're going to need to turn this text a different color here because it's not legible. So we can use our gray, our very light gray here, which kind of looks white actually because there's so much contrast in there. Let's push that white 100%. Let's turn this white again. And our link, we're going to follow the same rules or experiment. So let's say green. Okay, that green looks fantastic on the blue background. And what about our buttons? So what happens if we use red for the button? Okay. Now, do we break our rules and do we have a secondary color button that's different? Do we use outlines or do we use fills? Let's see what happens if we use a gray as a secondary. Okay, we have to change the text here. I think the text is fallen below the button there. Okay, it's hiding down there. So what happens if we use our grays? We're going to have to use a dark gray here. Okay, visually that kind of looks nice, but maybe that button looks disabled. But maybe you want a button that's inactive for a reason. Let's leave that. Or does this look like yellow? Oh, that's a little bit hard to read. I can read it, but I'm sure there's going to be some people in the world who are going to find that a little bit difficult. Another thing as well, when you're designing a website, you've got to take into account people with low vision. And even if you can read it, it just might take you a second longer to read. And it just might make you feel a bit uncomfortable. So every time you make the user work harder, it's just more difficult to use your website. So I'm not a great fan of that yellow and the white background. So I'm going to use the same as the button. There we go. Now let's choose a different color for our icon. Let's use the green. Okay. So this is just an idea of how all the colors work together. So if there's any problems with the buttons, any problems with the text, and to get a feel of how our website might look. Let's do one more and let's go a bit more crazy with this. Right, let's choose a yellow background here. Right, instead of the white. Wow, okay, now we can see how this has really changed it. This red isn't looking too great on the yellow background. Let's change this to the green. Okay, that's softer. The white button is more contrast there. Let's see what this green looks like. Not too bad, not amazing. Red, okay, it's not too bad in red. Again, I've got a feeling that this color combination isn't working as well as the ones above. But again, it's always good to try it. You never know. Okay, let's try and go for our light color background. I really feel these colors are just clashing here. They don't seem to be working together very well. So I want our black color and I'm going to take it from our headline here. And you can experiment with lots of things. So let's try, what does this look like in red? Okay, I quite like that in red, but be careful you don't get confused with the call to action or the link. Now I know the link is underlined and this is the headline, but you don't want to have any confusion here. But I do like that little red there. That's quite interesting. So maybe this headline here can be red. Okay, that's quite nice. So these are just kind of quick tests to identify any problems before you start going onto your main website. And if we go across onto the finished website, you can see how I've applied the colors here, and I've gone for more of a minimal approach here. So you can see I'm using a lot more grays, a lot more whites. I'm being really restrained in the use of colors. So green is reserved for the main call to action. The secondary buttons are just the blue, and we're using our other colors as little punches down here. And then to kind of break up the rhythm, we've used the dark blue background there and then gone back to the grays there. When creating a color palette and applying it to a website, I like to create a little mini checklist. And I'm going to give you an example of a website I made for a project management tool. And I'm going to run you through the checklist here. So I'll start off with thinking about the emotions I want to transmit with this color palette. So here I really wanted to transmit motivation, but at the same time calmness, because when you're doing a project management tool, you don't want to have too many distractions, but you really still want some energy in there. Then the next one is you've got to think about your target audience as well. So in the research here, we found out that the people using this website will be people working in tech between the ages of 25 and 45. Their culture will be an urban kind of Western culture. So if you can imagine somebody living in a big city working for a tech startup. Some references here in the market. We really love Google and how they use their colors, as well as Slack. And again, going back to some of the motions and ideas we want to transmit was we wanted to transmit this kind of diverse culture, fun, lots of different details. And then we also want to make sure that everything is legible. So we can use the web checker and assigning colors to functions. So you can see here, the main call to action is always green, and the secondary call to action is the dark blue there. So you can see again, the big play is green, and this link here is also green. There's a few times we might break this and we might use a green for an icon here, but perhaps this might look better if it was a red here, just so you don't think this is clickable. Okay, so let's look at accessibility and making sure everybody can read this, even people with low vision problems. So let's select our text, click here, let's copy the code across, and we're going to go to this website. This is included in the resources. So this is our text color. Let's paste it in here. Now we need our background color. Let's select the background here, copy that, bring it in here, paste it in here, and we can see this is fine here. So we've got a AAA rating. Now let's see what happens if we change these colors. So let's say we had a really light text, making it lighter. You can see it's only got AA rating, and as we get lighter and lighter, okay, it passes on large text, and then at this point, this website says this will be illegible and it fails. So you might be thinking, hey, I can read that really easily. But for some people with low vision, this might not be so easy. Again, and that has completely failed there. Okay, let's check some more of this text here. I'm a little bit worried about this green here. So let's double click on this green. Let's go across to the website and check that. So our background is completely white. And let's put this in here. Okay, so that's failed. So if it does fail, we might need to bring the saturation up or the darkness down, and then you can start kind of looking to see where that green works. So here, that says it works. Okay. So then we might need to go back, and if you really, really want your website to be completely accessible to everybody, we can then take this code here, we can go back, and then we can edit our color palette. So this is now our accessible green. So here, we can't see too much difference, but to some people that will make a grand difference and will make it a lot more legible there. But again, you've got to make these calls and you've got to see whether how accessible you want your website to be. Okay, so let's go through some kind of things not to do when choosing color, especially for type. So the amount of times I've had a client tell me, I want the text yellow on a white background. That is a classic thing not to do. Even if you have a very saturated yellow, that's going to be really hard to read. So let's go back and double check this. So we've got our color code here. Let's go to our website. Text, fail. White background, really vivid yellow text, and that is going to be really hard to read. Another thing as designers, and I actually quite like this, but again, it's not very accessible, is choosing very light grays. So be careful here. I have a feeling that this kind of gray here might not be 100% accessible. So let's choose that code. Let's paste it in here. Oh, okay, that actually passes. So I'm quite pleased with that because I wanted this contrast. Let's make this text a little bit lighter. So a lot of designers will like quite subtle text. Let's try that again. Let's paste it in here. Okay, that's failed. So you can kind of see here when we bring the lightness down, at what point this becomes 100% accessible. There we go. You can see that. We can also change the background as well. So let's bring this down, let's bring the saturation right down. So that's still accessible. That's still quite good. And then we're just on the limit there. So we fail there. And then I've seen websites like this that look really cool as a designer, but they're going to be a bit of a nightmare to read. When designing a website, you may have to adjust the colors of an illustration to fit your brand. In the next lesson, I'll show you how to do that. In this lesson, you'll learn how to take your color palette and apply it to an illustration. Let's get going. Now, this is really important when working in web design because we might need to take an illustration from a stock website, or we might need to adjust some other illustrators' work to fit our brand or fit in with the rest of our website. So we've got our example illustration here, all in vectors. We're working in Illustrator to edit this. And the first step is to choose our color palette. So we have our quadratic color palette here, adjusted so they're not clashing. And now what we're going to do, we're going to add some tints and shades. So let's copy our color palette here. Let's send that to the back. Arrange, send to back. We're going to select our color sliders. Show options. There we go. So now we can see the values. One personal preference I got, maybe it was a bit of a quirk, is I actually like to work in CMYK here, but obviously if it's a digital illustration, you can work in RGB. Just be careful with the differences there. So to make this darker, what you do, you press Command and then move the sliders down towards the left, and that makes it a lot darker and creates your shade. In CMYK, it's actually a little bit easier, funnily enough. All you have to do is kind of increase the K, which is the black key, and that just adds black. There we go. So keep in mind, if you're working for screen, it's probably best to work in RGB. Okay, let's make a shade out of this, darker. I actually find RGB a little bit harder to work in just because it doesn't feel as intuitive as, let's say, CMYK. So in CMYK, you can see that if I want to add black, I just add black, and I can tweak these colors here. Now this works independently to how you're set up. So if you go into File and then Document Color Mode, you can see we're working in RGB, and we will still be able to get our RGB colors, but we can use CMYK here and then it will convert the colors. But as it's digital, let's keep in RGB. And here, this is independent of what it is. We're still working in RGB, but we're just looking at it through kind of CMYK there, which I find a little bit easier to work with, to be honest. So let's just go back. We've lost the saturation in that blue. We had too much saturation in RGB sliders. So let's just add some black. Okay, now we want to make another set of shades because in our illustrations, we're going to need quite a bit of flexibility. Now let's send that to the back again. And these are going to be really dark. Okay, let's add a lot of black in there. So you can see how we add a black, so yellow, it turns into brown there. It's similar to the red as well. Next, we want to create our tints. So technically, this is just adding white to our color palette. Let's take the red, and here what we have to do, if you hold down Command and then click on the sliders and just bring them down here, that's a bit too much. So we want it about there. Now let's do the same with the yellow, bring that down. You don't have to use all these colors, but they're there in case we need them. Okay, let's bring that down, a bit lighter, again with the blue as well. Made a little mistake there. There we go. Let's copy these again, send them to the back. And then let's make some really light tints of these colors. Yeah, so these are going to be like almost like a wash. So be careful to press Command before you click on the sliders, so they all move down together. Click on that again, let's move that down. So now we have our color palette with our flexibility of having these dark tones and lighter tints here. Now, step 3, this is adding color balance here. So we can think about the kind of ratios we had before, the 60-30-10. And in this illustration, I want a lot of it to be the cream. So we're going to have a cream background, and then we can use these other colors as highlights here. Step 4, this is the fun part. So we just got to add or like apply this color scheme to this illustration here. So I'm going to start off with the red. I'm going to bring that tolerance down because it's selecting a lot of the colors that are very similar. Okay, so let's select this. I want this to be red, but not a punchy red, so I want a bit of a shade in there. And then here, I want that to be the more vibrant red. Be really aware of all the other colors you're changing around it. Let's say her top. I want this to be a green, so I want a nice contrast between the red sofa. Oh, we selected the plants as well, and obviously they've got to be green. And then we've also got the shades here, so we've got a bit of a jacket that's in shade. So let's pick one of these darker greens here. And as we go through, don't be scared to tweak these colors. So I think that's probably a bit too dark. Let's use that green. And I'm going to go through and keep on adding the color. I want this background to be our nice cream color. We're going to use as much as possible our palette here, but there might come a time when you think, right, this shade isn't quite right, this tint isn't quite right. So don't be scared to go in and start editing. Trousers, I want this to be the nice yellow color. Okay, that's looking good. T-shirt, let's select that with the magic wand tool. Now we've got what looks like a stool here, so I think this probably should be like a brown. We've got lots of nice browns here. I also see there's a darker shade there as well, so actually maybe that should be a lighter brown. Let's choose this, and then the other grey here, I want this to be a darker shade of brown. So let's use this shade here. Oh, something's gone wrong. That's not the right selection. Okay, let's zoom in, start looking at these tricky little parts here. So we're nearly there, and what I'm going to do now, I'm going to make a few kind of personal choices. I'm going to tweak this. I'm not happy with these two brown colors here. I think this is a bit too yellow. So now we're going to make our final adjustments. I want to make this a little bit less yellow. So take the yellow out of that. Doesn't look too strange. And then I don't like how this clock has a blue shadow. I think that should be a darker shadow. Just select one of our colors here. Oh, no, that's not the right one. It's here. Okay, so we have our final illustration, and apart from a few minor tweaks I might make later on, I think that's just about finished. You can also do variations. This is just one way of applying these colors, but maybe the chair should be green. So let's have a look at some other options here. We can take the green here, so change the color balance there, and then we can just turn her jacket red, make that really pop, and then just play around with some different options there. And there you have it. I love to see the color palettes you've created with these tips. In the additional resources, I left some tools and some information to help you create some bold and powerful color palettes. In the next lesson, I'll give you some advice on how to fix some bad color palettes. See you there. In this lesson, we're going to look at an illustration with some really bad color. I'm going to give you some tips on how to fix those colors, and we'll go through them step by step. So here we have our illustration that feels, let's say, a little bit overwhelming, and I'm going to run through the tips on the left. So first of all, it helps if you reduce the amount of colors in your illustration. Obviously, the more colors you have, the harder it is to get them to work together. So let's see what this illustration looks like with a few less colors. Okay, not a massive difference, but we're on our way and it's becoming more controllable. So next up, as you've probably guessed, there's too much saturation in the colors here. Now you don't have to reduce the saturation in all the colors. It really depends on what kind of emotions you want to transmit here. So let's see what this illustration looks like when we reduce the saturation of some of the colors here. Okay, it's a lot easier on the eyes now, and it's already starting to work a lot better. Number 3, not enough contrast and illegible text. So you can see this text up here, work from home. So that's white text on a cream background. That's not very legible. And also her legs here are blending into the background. So there's not enough contrast or no contrast. And the same with the plant pot on the left here. So we want to fix those two things. So we've added the color in here to our legs. So we've got enough separation on the background. Plant pot's all separated. And we're nearly there, but I still think there's a few things that are just not quite right here. So the color harmony is not really working. This blue here seems to stand out too much. I don't know, there's something not quite right. So I'm going to take the quadratic color harmony and I'm going to apply it to this design. Right, this is all working a lot better now. So we've got rid of this dominating pink. We've toned it down to a yellow. And you can see how her headphones, jeans, and plant pots all linked together there. We've also taken out the vibrant blue that seemed to be out of place there. So let's recap. So here are the 4 tips for curing bad color problems. First up is you might be using too many hues or too many colors, and that just makes our life really, really difficult. So we reduce the amount of hues. And then perhaps the most obvious was number 2, we reduced the saturation of some of the colors. It's okay to have some colors that pop out. That's great. But I generally find if all the colors are highly saturated, that's going to really give us a headache. Number 3, there's not enough contrast and legibility. So for instance, this type here, there's not enough contrast there. Her legs are kind of merging into the background. We fixed that. And then finally, we looked at the color harmony. So just making sure we take a cue from quadratic color harmony. You can choose whichever color harmony you feel is best, and that makes sure they all work together as a family. And now let's move on to fixing bad colors in website design. See you in the next lesson. In this lesson, I'll show you how to troubleshoot bad colors in web design. Here we go. Rather than kind of go through and adjust all these colors one by one, I've set up a few artboards here to show you the kind of key phases I go through when fixing bad colors. So as before, we've got too many colors here. So we've got this neon blue, we've got this lighter blue, we've got this red or pink, we've got an orange, just a lot going on there. And again, like I said in the other lesson, it just makes our life a lot harder, and you have a brand that's not very focused as well. So let's go on to the next artboard and reduce the amount of colors we're working with here. So the first step, this makes it a lot easier to kind of deal with here. So it's not as chaotic and it's a bit more focused. But there's still a lot of things wrong with this. I'll just zoom in a little bit more here just so you can see. And see if you can guess now and tell me kind of what is wrong with this web page and what is wrong with the colors here as we go down. Just take a look at all the things that kind of feel that it's not quite right and really jump out and scream at you, these colors are bad. So let's move on to the next stage. Too saturated and the colors are vibrating. You can see here this pink is highly saturated and is really vibrating with this blue here. So that's not working at all. So let's take that blue out. Okay, that's a lot calmer now. So let's go down. Okay, we're starting to get to a place where this design's working. There's a few more tweaks to make. I wonder if you can see some of the errors in here. Okay, so at the moment, I'm not happy with this pink. This red and pink's not working together. Ouch, this yellow as well. So that's not legible at all, and it seems to be really out of place. So another tip I have as well, it's good not to have colors that are too close to each other. Maybe this yellow is too close to this orange here. Going down the page, these icons are working better. Okay, so we're nearly there. Let's move on to the next stage. There's not enough contrast. So we've added more contrast in here. So this text is now legible. Let's zoom down the page. There's enough contrast in there. Yeah, I think that's quite legible. We might want to double check some of these little subheaders here, see if there's enough contrast with the background, but that's looking a lot better. So next up, we're going to check the bad color harmony. Okay, so we're using our quadratic color harmony, making sure all these colors play well nicely together. So I think we're just about here. I've seen a few little mistakes in the text. I'm gonna adjust those. There we go. There's always tiny mistakes everywhere. So let's just double check those. Go over your work, make sure all your details are correct. There's no colors out of place. All the text is legible. Okay, so I think we're just about there with this design. Last of all, I just want to run over just to make sure if there's enough consistency in the colors and there's a hierarchy of colors too. So our main call to action is green here, and our secondary call to action is this outline blue. So you can see this, it stands out a lot more on the page than this. And this is obviously what we want our user to do. And also, most of the items that are clickable or important are green here. So again, we use this consistent language throughout the entire page to make sure the user doesn't have to do that much work. Again, the main call to action, green, make sure there's enough space around there. So let's do a final comparison with our first block of colors here. Let's just copy that, bring it over to our nice colors. And finally, we can see the differences here. So you can see on the right-hand side, that's complete overkill. Too many colors, too saturated. There's almost too much contrast between the type here, lots of vibration. Not enough contrast in the titles here, so that black isn't legible against the background there. Too many colors going on, so we've got these kind of really random cyan colors, yellows here that are just not really part of our family of colors. We haven't got a dedicated color to the call to action here. And in general, these colors on the right seem all over the place and quite random. Whereas the colors on the left, they use a color harmony. We've tweaked that, we've updated it to our own personal needs. And we have dedicated colors for the call to action, buttons, and our secondary buttons here as well. Plus there's more than enough contrast so the navigation is legible and we can read the text comfortably. There you have it. In the next lesson, I'll show you some of the best colors to use for call to actions. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to improve your engagement and also grab your audience's attention with color. Before I go, I want to run over some tips for call to actions. Some of the most popular call to action colors are red or green, and there's been investigations into this and research done on this. A company called HubSpot actually tested this, and this is what they tested. So on the left-hand side, they tested a design with a green call to action, and on the right-hand side, they tested it with the red call to action. Now, which one do you think won? Apparently, the one on the right-hand side, the one on the red call to action, actually got a lot more conversions, a lot more people clicking on that button. We don't quite know why. Perhaps maybe the red stands out a lot more, it's a lot more vibrant. But again, it depends on the rest of the website, so be careful with this kind of comparison. So general best practices for call to action colors are that they're usually green, red, orange, or blue. Red is obviously a very good color for a call to action just because it's so vibrant and it stands out, but just be careful it doesn't look like a warning. And it really does depend on what the rest of your website looks like, what the rest of your brand looks like, and you've really got to make sure it fits in and really connects with your target audience. Some colors to stay away from, in general, are grey, black, or brown call to actions. But again, just make sure that fits in with your website. If you have a brown brand, maybe that's the correct color for the call to action. Just make sure it stands out from the rest of the website. So if we look at some examples here, Coca-Cola, now their main challenge is their main brand color is red. And obviously that's the kind of obvious choice for the call to action. So they don't want to use red a lot on the rest of the website. And if they did, then the call to actions wouldn't stand out. So you can see here, the logo is obviously in red and the call to actions and some links here. And the rest is quite sparse and minimal, and it doesn't take much work to see where the buttons are and where to click. Obviously, your call to actions have to fit in with your brand. Sometimes red can feel a bit too much like a warning. So looking at that IBM website, their corporate color is blue, and they've reserved this mainly for their links and call to actions here. Occasionally, I feel like you get a little bit overwhelmed when there's too many blue links and they don't feel special enough here. Another great color for a call to action button is orange. And again, it has to fit in with your brand. So on the Amazon website, one of their main brand colors is orange. And here we can see the call to action. We have different tones of orange or maybe yellow. And even though this is a really kind of text-heavy page, it doesn't take you very long to find out where the call to action is because there's not much else that is orange on this page, just the really important things. So the buy now button is obviously very important, the reviews are important, and the search. So if you're looking for a hierarchy of things on this page, it would be buy now, perhaps the review, search, and the logo. So Nike is a really good example of when to take these kind of best practice advice kind of guides online with a pinch of salt, because one of the things they say is like you shouldn't use white or black as a call to action. And what do Nike do? They use black and white. Maybe that's why the buttons are bigger than some other websites, but they've made the call that it's going to be a lot better to stay on brand, keep it really minimal, and their users will see that and see the button rather than having something that goes against their brand but maybe stands out more. They feel that might damage their brand. When you do go to the checkout page, we still have our black and white buttons and our fields, but then we look, wow, we have this really vivid orange button, and you know that's the most important thing on the page with the price. So to sum it up, your call to actions have to fit in with your brand, really connect with your audience, be something that that particular target audience wants to click on, and also contrast with the rest of your page. So if the rest of your page has a lot of red on it, maybe it's not a good idea to use a red call to action. And then they have to be super legible. One thing I would like to say is there's no one trick to kind of get more sales, more conversions, more clicks. It's very subjective, and it just has to stand out on your web page. So we're nearly at the end of the course, but don't go just yet. In the next lesson, I'll show you all you need to know to produce the final project. So you've reached the end of this Domestika course. I really hope you've learned all the basics of color theory, and now you're ready to create your own color palettes. Throughout this course, I've given you tips and tricks to apply these principles throughout the digital world. If you follow all the lessons, this will really help improve your designs in terms of color. So when you upload your projects, I really want you to be original, and I want to see your take on it. So how are you going to apply your color palette to your designs? So the first thing you need to do is to understand how humans perceive color. So there is a science behind color, but don't forget there's also the cultural parts and the psychological parts. These are all really important aspects to help you improve your brand communication and create meaning with color. After that, I talked about the basic terminology of color. This will help you understand in further detail how color works, and it also improves your communication skills with clients. You'll then have to apply the principles of color harmony to create strong and engaging color palettes. Keep in mind accessibility when you're designing for the web. Some people have low vision problems, and color can really help in those circumstances. Finally, I'll talk to you about how to apply your color palette to an illustration and a website. Think about all the tips I shared with you on how to solve color problems and how to make your design more engaging to your audience. Don't be afraid to experiment with color. There are some obvious kind of classic combinations of color harmonies, but if you really set your mind to it, you can find some really unexpected, fantastic color combinations. Explore, do your research, and think about the colors that really inspire you. I'd love to see what you come up with. Also, don't forget to participate in the forum. I'll be there to answer any questions and give you advice. Don't be scared to share ideas and give advice to other students. You'll find that you'll learn so much from others. It's been great to share my color insights with you. Thank you and goodbye, and I'll see you in the forum.